here. So as I said previously, my name is Ulf Andreasson. I work as a systems engineer here in Sumo Logic, mainly focused in EMEA, of course. But yeah, so I'm going to take you through what we can do with Sumo, and specifically when it comes to AWS and sort of observing AWS environments. There is quite a lot of things, and just for anyone who hasn't sort of looked into Sumo before, so to speak, Sumo is really this kind of continuous intelligence platform that we provide as a service to you. So software as a service, or whatever you want to call it, right? What we essentially do is that you can ingest all these kind of different kinds of data, typically what we call machine data. But in essence, it could be anything that's readable, you know, regardless if it's unstructured, structured, or whatever it is, right? Anything that you can read. So, you know, we've got customers also ingesting like weather data or kind of IoT type devices in here. And then what Sumo will do for you is effectively make sure that the data is stored and safely sort of, you know, secured, but also index the data, make it available for any kind of search or analytics that you may want to run against it, making it available for putting into dashboards or creating alerts out of it. So, and the users on your side can be a plethora, or essentially the whole type of company, right? So anything from developers and IT ops people to security to support to business people, right? It's just a question of what kind of use cases are you looking for, and how could you satisfy that use case with the data that has been ingested into Sumo. So it really gives you this kind of complete capability of and capability of analyzing all the data that your platform or that your IT environment is generating, without having to kind of manage a lot of servers and systems and thinking about scalability and security and all these other things. That's essentially what we would do for you. Now, we look at this very often from sort of three different type of major kind of use cases, which is operational intelligence, security intelligence, and also business intelligence. And I think the main takeaway from this slide is that, except for these use cases, the kind of true SaaS model that Sumo provides, you know, effectively a cloud native, modern type of application that we have, really gives you this kind of elastic scale. You know, any kind of data can be ingested. From a commercial perspective, we have a very flexible and sort of interesting licensing model, where basically it's the amount of data that you send into Sumo that you're paying for. Now, once it comes into Sumo, you can also store it in different kind of tiers, so data tiers, which you pay differently for. So it's very cost effective in that way. And then, of course, kind of using you know, machine learning and advanced analytics to kind of really be able to get to what you want to get to, right? Those are the kind of major you know, takeaways from the Sumo platform. Now, there's one more, and that is, of course, that if you're going to send all your machine data into another platform, which is not yours, you want to make sure that it's a secure platform and that you can, you know, attest to the different regulations out there. So Sumo has a very kind of well and proven platform in that sense, and we follow a lot of these kind of regulations at the stations, and this is all available for you to take a look at. So knowing that you use Sumo, you know that you have a secure platform underneath of yourself. In addition to that, what I want to touch on and what we're going to see through the demo is, of course, what kind of data and how do you use the different kinds of data in the system. So the first thing is that you want to monitor your environment. And monitoring really means that you're looking at metrics, you're trying to understand from, you know, from a resource perspective, how much of that are you using, how much of these things is kind of, you know, optimally used versus where do you eventually develop some problems. So that piece of data is actually fairly small, and you don't need that much. I mean, basically it's only metrics, Metrics doesn't really take that much storage. It's fairly simple to kind of analyze because it's basically, you have some time series graphs, and that's basically what you do with it, or you calculate some numbers out of it, and you can do all that. Now, once you start to see some problems, you need to diagnose that. You need to understand, why is this kind of CPU suddenly kind of creeping up, or what is it that makes that your latency between systems or your error rates to your web server, why is that sort of increasing? And of course, you need to have more data of that. So maybe you start looking into traces, maybe you start to look in some of the logs or some of the additional metrics there. And of course, when you need to troubleshoot, you're going to need a lot more data, right? And this is where kind of you need to have the amount of logs that you can get from the systems, and the more kind of complex problems you have, the more logs, and also not just that you need logs or kind of traces, but you also need to understand how are these related, what kind of context are these logs coming in, how can I enrich the data so that really makes sense for me to kind of fully understand. And this is, of course, the kind of challenge today is like the vast amount of data. And this kind of is really where we're trying to help you, because these challenges are definitely there, right? And it's kind of something that we need to address. So as such, some of those things is that using the machine learning, using the kind of advanced analytics that we have, can really take away much of the pain points of looking through the kind of all the log lines you have. Maybe you maybe don't know when you need all that data. So therefore, you can put that into a different data tier and make it very cost efficient. So there's a lot of benefits to this, but this is kind of really where, you as a consumer of this kind of need to understand. The other thing that we can see throughout kind of our customers and essentially the adoption of AWS or cloud services, but this is specific to AWS, is that the median number of services that's being consumed by AWS customers today has increased from just a couple of years ago. It was more like 15. It's now up to 25 different services. This means that basically most of customers out there who'd been using AWS for some time is effectively consuming 26 different services, where EC2, RDS, and IAM, and STS, and these things, these are the kind of top services within AWS today. And of course, we see kind of Kubernetes deployment being on a very high increase. ECS and containers in general is also kind of something that almost every customer is starting to use today, right? So there's this kind of complexity of more services, needing the need to have sort of detailed information when you have problems developing. These are the kind of things that really makes it a challenge to kind of have a true sort of monitoring capability within your IT environment, right? And in addition to that, we also see, and probably driven by the Kubernetes deployments, is that more and more customers are also starting to use multi-cloud sort of adoption. So not only are you using maybe AWS, but Azure or GCP, or maybe, essentially every customer also has a bit of migration from sort of an on-prem data center to the cloud as well, right? And so there's a lot of kind of complexity in trying to have a holistic platform that really can give you all this. This is why we, as in Sumo, developed what we called AWS Observability. And without spending too much time on this slide, but just basically saying that, the trying to give you a way to navigate through your environment in a simple way, more thinking like this: if you don't know what you're looking for, how are you going to consume all this data? How are you going to make sense of all this data? Giving you a lot of out-of-the-box content, like dashboards or alerts or whatever it may be, but also then, and this is actually the last point here with 6 AWS services, this is actually out to date because we've also added, I think, another 3 services now. So you're going to have ECS, And you're going to have some other data services in there too. And this is kind of something we're adding constantly, right? And if nothing else, you can add your own services. If we haven't done it for you yet, you can actually add your own services into this kind of AWS observability solution we have. So with that in mind, kind of let's jump into a demo immediately. And I guess what I wanted to kind of just highlight is that Sumo is much more about is much more than just sort of AWS observability. We have sort of over 100, if not 150 different technologies that we can support you with to really understand. So AWS observability is just a piece of it, right? And it's also just part of what we provide from an AWS perspective in itself. So there's a lot more to it than just AWS observability. But the beauty with AWS observability is that it's a very focused and sort of, discrete use case, which basically anyone who's been using AWS for a while will start to appreciate. From a deployment perspective, it's actually quite simple, and I'll touch on the deployment after we've done the demo. But basically, you collect the data using a quick start or using kind of a CloudFormation template, so it's completely automated in how you do that. Now, once you've done that, you basically click on this kind of application icon here, and you would add this to the library. Oh, sorry, this will be added when you actually do the deployment. So there's nothing here for you to do, but here's just a view of what you're going to get. You can have a preview of the dashboards and things like that. But let's jump into the Explorer itself, because that's really the way we use or the way we consume sort of AWS observability, as we call it, is via the Explorer. And there's a lot more things you can do within Sumo, but it's this is kind of the way to go. So when I open up the Explorer, I have AWS observability is one piece of it, but this is just one. I mean, you can look at Kubernetes cluster in the same way. We have application service views or service application views, which are more related to tracing and those things. But this is kind of just one implementation of how we would use the Explorer. Now, when you get into a kind of large environment of AWS, you may have multiple accounts, you're going to have multiple regions used within those accounts. And, I've been talking to many customers who well over 100 and some customers over 200 sort of different AWS accounts throughout the world. So in this case, I got a very simplistic environment. I got 3 accounts. I've divided these into, or, a demo environment as it is, but basically having a prod environment, having a dev or development environment, and having a staging environment kind of takes me through my life cycle of the development of an application and the productification of that. So in this case, it's a fairly simplistic environment. But that said, I can just get a very quick overview of what is happening in my AWS environment, specifically now with regards to my prod environment. Where are my clients coming from, or activities in general? What kind of resources are being consumed the most? Just looking at ALBs or API gateways, EC2 instances, this just gives me a good overview of what is happening, what am I consuming within my production environment. And as such, this is, of course, kind of a average of everything I see. So when I look at prod, I got 2 different regions. Within those regions, I may be running EC2 instance. We'll look at that in a minute. And I can see sort of the metrics from there on. So this is kind of very simplistic, just giving you an overview of what you may want to see, right? Delving into US East 1, we can see what specifically is being used there. And again, I get an overview of what is being used here. I can see that I have some ALB errors. I can see that the gateway here is having a lot of workload to do, and I can kind of delve into these things more. Now, what I may, just an example, let's kind of look at some Lambda sort of issues I may have, or some just understanding what's happening. So when it comes to Lambda, you know, I can see that I got a lot of different functions here that are effectively being called, or Lambda functions, as in, you know, what is happening here. The caller locations, I can see that. The performance of this, you know, the number of invocations, the duration of those invocations as well. And not only do I see today's value, which is this kind of dark blue one, I can also see yesterday's value. So I can compare something as well as I see last week's value. So when I sort of hover over here, I can effectively see, you know, depending on which one I'm focusing on, I can see the metrics for it. I can see where we are. And obviously I can see that last week I had a lot more invocations than what I'm having this week or today. And it just gives me an overview of those kind of things, right? Maybe more interesting is to see what sort of, you know, the top AWS services using Lambdas, or maybe the arrow count of the kind of Lambda invocations I'm having, or throttling events. Obviously, probably more interesting is kind of functions by duration, or if there's any specific sort of problems I'm seeing here. So the get billing information here seems to be, not that it's that high, but it's certainly sort of a few more errors than the other ones, right? So these are the kind of things that could be interesting to look into more. And I can also kind of see, you know, quite a lot of information here with regards to, you know, memory being consumed or the average duration, things like that, right? And of course, kind of successful and unsuccessful requests. So there's a lot of information I can just kind of browse through and look at and see if there's anything of interest. So, I mean, now we're looking at everything that goes on, right? What I also can do is that I can, of course, kind of, I can dig in deeper into this, right? So looking at this, I can go straight in to look at just one specific sort of function name. Now we can see that, you know, for the last 24 hours, I've been having quite a lot of issues here with this one. So database authentication errors has been happening here, and there's quite a few. 700 of those have happened during the last 24 hours. So that may be something that may be a bit of concern. You know, of course, I'm only focusing on this sort of function here now. So it gives me all the information just about this. Looking through, you know, I basically have only unsuccessful sort of requests here. So you know, all of this is kind of light blue. And when I look at these things as well, right, I see a couple of different events here, operations to this. So there's a lot of invocations and listings of functions, but I can also see that I have a configuration change here. So that could be of a bit of an interest. And what I can do there is that I can open up this in search. Now, looking at this from a search window, this is the aggregated views, effectively the list of what you had there. But I can really get into all the details about this. And this is kind of really the nitty-gritty of what you could see. Now, what I'm interested in is this configuration change that happened here. Because what this could be is that, you know, we do know that there was a database authentication issue. And here I have, you know, Mark Smith have been into this function and actually changed it. I can't necessarily see the change he did, but I could certainly go and speak to Mark Smith and see what kind of changes he did. And eventually, if we could, you know, rectify that change, because obviously there's only one single sort of event configuration change there, and that could definitely be the reason for doing this. Just to kind of highlight as well, one of the other benefits or kind of really strong things with using Sumo here is that, you know, when we go in here, I can actually get information, just go straight into, say, all the logs for this specific function. So having Sumo, collecting all the logs and kind of storing them in Sumo, I can go straight into, now, you know, this function here just gave me a lot of errors. And yes, when I look at those error messages, I basically have this error here, right? So invalid credentials, and that's essentially what I see page by page here. So as I said, this is a demo environment. So what we've done is we kind of did this change. You could see that this was kind of really hitting every sort of invocation of this Lambda function, and that's really again being collected. And now I can go in and kind of see that immediately here. These logs are collected continuously and are being stored in Sumo. So even if you delete the function, or even if this was kind of a container running somewhere and that container only lived for 10 minutes, we would still have that in Sumo. You could still do this kind of troubleshooting. So those are the kind of really good features with using Sumo in that sense. As another example in just kind of pivoting between different environments here, as I said, looking at an EC2 instance, or sorry, looking at an EC2 environment, or maybe even more so when it comes to a container environment, you're going to have quite a lot of different sort of entities to look at, or different sort of objects. And the problem is, of course, when you have loads of them. And here we can see sort of, we look at essentially EC2 instances by CPU utilization or by memory utilization. I can see sort of the average consumption of CPU for this specific environment, which basically is prod US East 1. But what I can do, as I showed you previously, right? I have this entity browser, which basically means that when I click on this in this specific sort of instance of an EC2 system here, I can get to the logs, or the error logs, or even the error signatures for this. This is just basically kind of logs being collected. Error logs is effectively a log that includes the word error, failure, any of those kind of typical things that would indicate yes, fatal, and those kind of expressions within the log as well. I could also be recommended to look at different kind of dashboards. So maybe, if you're interested in this, maybe it could be something related to the API gateway, or maybe EC2 ECS instances where you're using EC2 as an underlying compute platform could be of interest. From a hierarchy point of view, we know that we're in the prod environment, we know that we are in US East 1, but I can also easily get to the specific instance and the detailed information about that specific instance too. So, I mean, obviously it's in the list here, but this list could be long, and I can then very easily kind of pivot into the instance itself. And now I'm only looking at this specific EC2 instance, and we can see that the CPU utilization here is very high. We can see that memory is being high as well. And, I haven't collected that, but I could start to collect the kind of process or processes running on this system as well. That's not being collected here, but that could be sort of added to it. And then you would have a much better understanding of that. Now, we are just looking at the summary of this. I could, of course, go in to look at the specifics with regards to CPU consumption. So now we start looking at use time, kernel time, sort of idle time, and all these kind of specifics that you would get with like, CPU stats or something like that. The beauty with this is that you can get to any of these kind of instances, or any of these kind of, whatever object it is, and you can get all this data without having to actually go to a system or log on to a system, and, being able to have everything in one single place. That's kind of some of the real beauty with kind of Sumo in that sense. Another way to kind of use Sumo or AWS Observability specifically would maybe be to do some additional troubleshooting there, right? So I have, maybe you saw I had some red lines with regards to my application ELB. And here we can see that there's a lot of high latency there, kind of threat intel count. That's actually the worthwhile or worth noted to kind of think about. What we do in Sumo is that we collect all this information. Out of the box and for free, you can actually use the CrowdStrike CrowdStrike database of threat intel. So that's integrated into Sumo. So any kind of IP address, any email or domain name or anything like that is actually being kind of, you know, you can use that to check with the CrowdStrike database, threat intel database, to see if any IP address here is associated with a bad actor. So that's actually very strong. That's not unique to AWS Observability, but this just gives you that kind of extra layer of security. You could, of course, have sort of CrowdStrike or many of the other tools as well there, but just having that, being able to kind of go through all the IP addresses that's been connecting your services, and then kind of double check that, both with regards to location, where they're coming from, you know, someone up here in the kind of high north, or just kind of seeing if there's a bad actor associated with the specific IP address. That could be very well and useful. But that wasn't what we were going to look at. Let's kind of go down the list here, and we can see sort of the you know, 500 or 400 load balancer kind of status codes. We can see that there's a lot here. Now we're looking for the last 24 hours. So if I go down to look at the last kind of 16, actually, no, this is not. Let me look at yesterday or the last 3 days. So yeah, the beauty here is, of course, that I can use this in a very nice way to kind of look at different sort of data, different time frames of data. So now I'm looking at the last 3 days. I can see there's a lot more threat intel happening or being identified, and obviously the numbers here are going up in every possible sense. But it just gives me like an overview. So 3 days was maybe too much. What I want to get to is to actually see an elevated number of issues here with regards to my production service here. Here I'm seeing a bit of a spike, right? So I see that I have suddenly sort of a high elevated number of error rates in my 500s. So this is just yesterday to today, right? And this roughly is kind of at 1:55 p.m. So there's a couple of things I can do to this. One of the things I can do is to look at the events of interest. This basically means that what we do with events of interest, and this kind of takes a look at different kind of metrics that are deviating from normal. So, and what normal is depends on what they normally do. So I'll open up this in the root cause explorer. Now we filtered this, so we kind of very specifically looking at maybe just the ELB app. Let me clear this so that we will look at everything. Now you suddenly see that there's a lot more sort of dots here on this chart, and this one here is very high up, so we got some EC2 latency there. You know, this is a lot of information here, but the main thing is that I can filter this down to both the kind of region, the accounts I may be into. You know, I even have some filtering with regards to Kubernetes and traces. You know, in this case, I really don't have that much there. But I can also kind of filter this down to, you know, the account and so on. So there's a lot of capabilities. I can, if I don't like the kind of round or the elliptic forms, I can also use squares, which may be, you know, the intent here with the kind of circles is that the bigger the circle, the bigger the problem. The different color coding is, of course, with regards to the signals, and the signals are taken from the SRE handbook by Google. So, you know, really looking at sort of load and throughput, typically being the kind of instigators of not necessarily instigators, but the kind of symptoms of the problem. So when you start to see load and throughput problem, those are typically going to develop into a latency or availability or error problem in the future. So it's always good to have a look at the kind of load and throughput, because that may well develop into something worse later on. Now, I can also focus this. So I can actually get a better overview of this in just looking at it. Now, as you can see, I get, just by hovering over it, I can see some more information here. But it's also kind of, when I click on any of these things, I can actually see the specific problem itself. So in this case, DynamoDB, I had a bottleneck here with the VPC flow logs. And I can see that for 20 minutes, I've had this been drifting away for 382%. So it kind of went way above what it normally looks like. And here you can see the kind of what normal looks like, or at least what it looked like yesterday or one day ago. And this is, of course, related to the time frame I selected. So one day ago is effectively 2 days ago, right? But I can also see what happened for like 7 days ago or 1 week ago. So obviously I'm seeing some sort of spikes here, which are the kind of drifting that we are identifying here. And this kind of, this just shows me that things are developing here, as in, you know, bottlenecks. This one here, right? A deployment load, which is my Travel Logic application, has gone on for 90 minutes. So it's just a kind of nice way to show you, if you think of it like this, you come in the morning, you don't know what's been happening during the kind of last 12 or 24 hours or whatever. This will give you an indication of things have been drifting away from what you would expect to be sort of normal in your environment. Of course, if one of those metrics is kind of increasing constantly, that wouldn't really become a problem. The problem is only when we've seen that this is really an outlier or an anomaly. That's when we kind of start to see that, you know, there's issues here that we need to take a look at. And that's where we would be sort of, you know, being alerted to that, or being kind of looking into that. So, of course, you know, it's a good way to kind of use this. Now, this is not the only way, because of course, what I would be doing is that when I have an issue developing like this, I would first of all sort of try to understand what the issue here is. But then, of course, I would also go in and create what we call monitors or alerts. So there are sort of over 30 different monitors being added to the system, just kind of by adding AWS Observability. So many of these are just metrics based, because you're looking at that, like CPU utilization. Do you want to see that? You know, do you want to be alerted by that? In that case, you can just click on this and enable, or yeah. So here's the kind of search itself. And basically, if this has been greater than 90% for continuous 5 minutes, or when it happens, then you want to have some kind of alert or notification around this. And you can choose how you're going to be notified around this. So that's kind of a simple way of doing it. Now, as an action to this, you can just enable this one. So we've obviously stopped all of these because this is demo environment. Otherwise, we will get a lot of Slack channels or Slack messages there, or emails, or whatever way we want to kind of communicate with this. And of course, you can sort of, you know, you can sort of integrate this with PagerDuty or ServiceNow, or kind of just having webhooks to pretty much any system out there. So there's a multitude of ways you can sort of do this. But what I also wanted to show you is, of course, you can do this based on a search query. So not only do you log or do you alert on things that are happening on a metric, but being able to identify something that is kind of what you can find from just looking through the logs is also incredibly powerful, because now I can look at things. Sorry, someone's. Now I can look at things that really kind of highlights, you know, activities from log lines that could be kind of useful to be alerted by. So that pretty much concludes the demo I had for today. I mean, there's a lot of different things, you know, we adding constantly to this. So, you know, having a lot more sort of information here, adding different services from AWS into observability. That's kind of really what we're trying to do, and try to give you as much out of the box as possible, right? In addition to the demo per se, this is kind of the more boring, but basically it's likewise equally important, but just being able to collect all this data. Now, previously, you've been able to go in and you can collect EC2 data, or you can collect RDS, and typically what this is most of the times happening is that you need to kind of, you know, collect the data from CloudWatch, or you need to kind of pick it up from S3 buckets or whatever it is, right? We've automated all this for you. So first of all, we have a CloudFormation template that basically will go in, and first of all, it will ask you what kind of accounts, what kind of regions do you want to collect from, what kind of services do you want to collect from. If you are already collecting from various services, you can just give us the S3 bucket and we go and collect from there. So we will not replicate anything, we'll just basically take what you've already set up. In a greenfield opportunity or kind of situation, we would of course go in and create everything for you. So it's very simple, but also, as I said, what we will also do is install everything that you have to have on the Sumo side. So we'll install the applications for you. We'll make sure that it runs in the AWS Explorer, in the Explorer as the AWS Observability. But we will also make sure that we have the accounting information, we have the region, namespaces, and entities, so that you get the full context of this and you can really sort of see the complete picture of it. So that's kind of really helping you a lot in that sense. And you know, having all this kind of out of the box, you know, you basically download a CloudFormation template, and once you're sure you can run it with regards to permissions and everything, you will just kind of run that and wait for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then you're going to have data flowing in. We do need to collect the EC2 metrics as well. One thing I would like to highlight people of is that we are working with AWS, so that we're effectively going to start to collect data from Kinesis Firehose as well, both logs as well as metrics. This is kind of something that AWS is working on as well, and they're pushing sort of more and more. The beauty with this is the latency to get logs or metrics from AWS into Sumo is going to be much, much quicker, because this doesn't actually go through CloudWatch. So it's much quicker in getting the data over to Sumo, and of course, then making us kind of more real time in that sense. But I'm hoping that's going to sort of be very much of interest for you guys. And of course, there's a lot of platform differentiators we have. I'm not going to touch on that, but I am sort of opening up for questions. So any question you may have, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A. I'm happy to sort of respond to that. What I also can highlight people of is that this is of course something we're constantly working on. And for example, one of the things we released just not yesterday, but I think was the beginning of this week or whenever. The root cause explorer is now also available for Kubernetes. So, you know, having metrics and traces in there, you maybe saw that on the filtering, that you could actually filter on traces and sort of Kubernetes metrics. So this is now available for that as well. And basically, we're adding sort of constantly here more functionality into Sumo and sort of giving it more value. And this is something that goes on continuously. So one day you'll just kind of have a new icon or new functionality in Sumo, you can start using it immediately. So that is quite good. So yeah, please shoot any questions and I'm happy to take them. I do have something here. So basically, a question is, how do Sumo charge for this? And as I said in Nietzsche, or I think I said at least, that basically the main thing with regards to Sumo is kind of you're paying the usage of Sumo based on ingest. Now there's a lot of kind of things to that, right? But the short answer is based on the amount of data you're sending into Sumo. Now the longer answer is that there is, you're paying for the logs essentially. You do pay for metrics as well, but that is typically a fraction of it. So it doesn't cost that much to kind of send in metrics because basically they don't consume anything. But the beauty with log ingest as well is that you actually have different data tiers. So there's essentially 4 different data tiers. The exceptional ones are either real-time or archive. Archive basically means that we're going to send it to your own kind of S3 bucket, but you take it through Sumo. So Sumo is aware of the data that you sent to your own S3 bucket. We can then re-ingest that at any point in time if you would want to search through that data. So think of it like this. You will send all the archive data into your own S3 bucket going through Sumo. Suddenly you see like, oh, there was actually an event happening for like 1 week ago, and I would want to kind of be able to search through that data. You can then re-ingest that in a simple way into Sumo. You can then search for the data. Now, between those 2 sort of exceptional ones, you have something called frequent and infrequent. Frequent basically means that it's available in Sumo, you pay a small fee for it, but it's available in Sumo, you can run any kind of search against it. You can't sort of have alerts against it because it's not real time, but it is available, so you can search through it at any point in time, and you can you can visualize it in the search, but you can't put it on dashboards and things. Now, infrequent is a very cost-effective way of getting the data into Sumo. We are not indexing the data. You're still able to search through it, but you're effectively paying an incredibly small fee for the storage of it. But then you're paying for the number of scans, or the number of gigabytes you scan through when you actually do a search. So it's not you're effectively not sort of paying for the storage as much, but you're paying for each and every search against it. So those are the kind of 4 different discrete ways of getting data into Sumo and storing data in Sumo. The first one is essentially kind of real time. The second one is frequent, which basically means it's not real time, but you are able to search through it. It's indexed, it's available for you at any point in time. The infrequent is that you don't really pay for the storage of it, but you mainly sort of paying for the search. And then the 4th one is essentially the archive, which basically you just kind of archive it to your own S3 bucket, and then it's available to re-ingest to Sumo if need be. So yeah, sorry, that was a long answer to a short question. But there's another question here which basically talks about implementing CloudFormation template in AWS. Will utilize high resource in AWS side. So I guess the question is more like, will this consume a lot of resources in the AWS side? And no, it won't really. Obviously, everything is a bit of a, how long is a piece of string? If there is a lot of data being sent into Sumo, then yes, the Lambdas or the S3 bucket is going to be, utilized a lot more. But there's no difference in collecting the data using the CloudFormation template versus kind of collecting data using a Lambda invocation or something like that. The CloudFormation template actually makes it easier in the way that you get much more control. If you, for example, would think that it does consume too much, then you could just kind of, you could go in and tweak the CloudFormation, or, we can help you kind of look at why that would happen. But the short answer to your question is that it will consume as much as if you didn't run it through CloudFormation. Essentially, we need to get the data into Sumo somehow. Using AWS, we are in the kind of, we're going to have to use the CloudWatch or the S3 buckets or whatever they provide to kind of send the data into Sumo. But you know, in experience, and I've been here for 3 years, the cost of sending data into Sumo is minimal. It's you know, everything is of course based on like, okay, how much value does this provide for you versus how much is this how much value does it provide versus what is the cost of it. And I've not really had any customer complaining about this. Once they understand how we do it, they are satisfied with that and don't see that as a problem. So I'm hoping that responded to your question. Okay. Yeah, so I think if there's no further questions, I'm not gonna kind of keep you any longer. I hope this has been valuable. And I mean, if you have any questions, reach out to anyone in Sumo or myself. There's also a Slack channel on something called Sumo Dojo, so DOGO. And basically you can kind of always ask for, you know, ask any questions there. You get my email here, so just email me if there's any specific questions, and I'm happy to help you guys. And as I said, anyone else in Sumo is also happy to help. So just let us know. If you want to, you can just go to sumologic.com and open up an account and effectively get going with AWS Observability in sort of a couple of minutes after this call. So, you know, have a go and let me know if there's anything I can help with. So thanks a lot for today.